The next item on the order paper is a motion on the consequences of the British Government breaking international law. I will ask the Clerk to read the motion.
That this Assembly is appalled that the British Government has abandoned any pretence of adherence to international law, recognises that the potential for a trade agreement between the European Union and the United Kingdom has significantly diminished as a result of the British Government reneging on key elements of the Withdrawal Agreement, acknowledges that this would be devastating for workers and families with inevitable business failures, job losses and economic damage, and calls on the British Government to respect the rule of law and honour its obligations in full as set out in the Withdrawal Agreement, which it negotiated and which the British Parliament agreed.
Thank you. I call Dr Caoimhe Archibald to move the motion. Éireann Sir Caoimhe Archibald leis an rún ó Chorchontásaí.
I beg to move.
Thank you. The Business Committee has agreed to allow up to 1 hour and 30 minutes for this debate. The proposer of the motion will have 10 minutes to propose and 10 minutes to wind. All other speakers will have 5 minutes. Please open debate on the motion.
Margaret, last can Corlia. On the 8th of September, the British Secretary of State for the North, Brandon Lewis, stood up in the House of Commons and confirmed that the Internal Market Bill would break international law, and in doing so confirmed what everyone already knew, that the bill, if enacted, fundamentally breaches the Withdrawal Agreement and Protocol on Ireland within it. The blatancy of this admission, however, was greeted with shock and dismay. It defies the norms expected of states that operate on accepted conventions. It is also, in fact, a breach of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, which is the standard that states are held to when they sign international agreements, such as the Withdrawal Agreement, and which the British Government is a signatory to. The response has been damning, not just from the EU, which would be expected, but equally as vociferously from amongst the British political and legal classes, with diplomats and politicians from all shades condemning the bad faith and lamenting the impact these actions will have on holding other states accountable. This bill, it seems, is a step too far even for Geoffrey Cox, the British Attorney General who this time last year presided over the proroguing Parliament debacle. He has slated it, stating it would lead ultimately to very long-term and permanent damage to Britain's reputation. And of course, anyone with any sense who has one eye to future trade deals also realises the potential impact of the reputational damage such actions has. Why would anyone hold any faith to any agreement the British Government signs up to in the future? The strong response from the US has continued, with bipartisan support towards upholding the protections afforded to the Good Friday Agreement by the Protocol in the Withdrawal Agreement, with the consequence being no trade deal between Britain and the US unless these protections are upheld. And let's be clear, the protections of the Protocol provide some degree of certainty for the all-island economy and to protect North-South cooperation. But the Protocol will function most effectively in the context of a comprehensive free trade agreement based on zero tariffs. And that is what is most frustrating and utterly futile about the Internal Market Bill. It has increased the uncertainty and it has damaged relations and trust in the negotiation process, a process we already knew was difficult and slow. It seems Boris Johnson and his cronies have spent the past 10 months in denial of what they actually signed up to and ratified in the Withdrawal Agreement. And instead of putting best endeavours into finding reasonable and workable outcomes, particularly in relation to the Protocol, they have tried instead to wriggle out of the commitments they made. We are now looking at a very tight timetable to see the negotiations conclude, with a key stock-taking looming at the EU Council meeting on the 15th of October. The reality is, of course, it is our businesses, our communities and our economy that will stand to suffer worse from a no-trade deal outcome. Our highly integrated supply chains that will be most damaged by increased barriers. Our business community has been very clear that what they need and don't have right now is clarity. And with the clock ticking down rapidly, they fear what is coming down the line at the end of the year. Even if it's an agreement, the timetable to implement what is agreed is too tight. They couldn't be any more clear. They want an agreement, and an agreement which creates the minimum in bureaucracy. And I'm very mindful, as we stand here today, amidst growing numbers of cases of COVID-19 and the potential for increased restrictions, our businesses have already faced months of the most difficult circumstances. That has already caused debt to be accrued and put many jobs on the line. Many workers and families are already struggling as a result, and we face the end of the furlough scheme at the end of this month, which will see thousands more jobs lost. It's already a bleak economic outlook with predictions of record unemployment, and that's without even taking into account a no-trade deal outcome. I, like everyone else here I'm sure, have absolutely no desire to see a hard administrative border down the Irish Sea that damages our businesses, many of them SMEs, with no real capacity to deal with the cost and red tape associated with such. Those on the opposite benches who criticise the protocol, and particularly those who campaign for the sunny uplands we now face, have no alternative that guarantees north-south, east-west trade on the same basis we now have, in the context of the type of Brexit Britain has insisted on, because they are in fact contradictory aims. But Brexit itself is the cause of the difficulties we face, and while the protocol offers some protections, nothing is as frictionless as the arrangements we currently have. In that respect, the future arrangements negotiations are the only show in town. We are all familiar at this point with the issues that are still causing difficulties: fisheries, state aid, governance. It was restated again at the end of last week's round of negotiations. Concerns remain at the lack of meaningful proposals from the British negotiators. So the focus at this point needs to be on finding resolutions to those issues and ensuring the technicalities of the protocol are worked through to a positive conclusion as quickly as possible. The Internal Market Bill has been an unnecessary distraction in that regard and does not, despite what the British Government and its proponents say, resolve the issues of unfettered access. The rumours that the British Government would go further still and legislate for the definition of at-risk goods would be even more unhelpful and cause deeper ructions in the negotiations. A lot of the discussion until now has been how the bill breaches the Withdrawal Agreement commitments in respect of issues of trade. But last week also saw a significant intervention from the Equality and Human Rights Commissions, outlining how this bill also breaches both the Good Friday Agreement and protocol commitment on rights. This is deeply concerning, particularly in the context of this British Government's known intentions in respect of the Human Rights Act. It is vital that all aspects of the protocol are fully implemented and there is no watering down on those rights protections, either in an apparent way or by stealth. Following the publication of the Internal Market Bill, the EU clearly set out its response. If the British Government did not remove the clauses of the bill which breaches the Withdrawal Agreement by the 30th of September, it would take legal action for breach of agreement. The Internal Market Bill passed the House of Commons last Tuesday without necessary amendments, and on the 1st of October the EU issued legal action on the basis that the bill breaches the good faith articles of the Withdrawal Agreement, and that if it becomes law will breach the protocol commitments. It's deeply unfortunate that action was necessary, but the British Government needs to be held accountable for what it agreed to. It seems to have come to some in the British Government as surprise, and also here in the North, that the EU has followed through and taken the action it stated it would. The British Government has form, of course, when it comes to not implementing agreements, but to borrow a phrase, they're playing senior hurling now, and not living up to commitments won't cut it. Worse still is stating that you intend to deliberately breach them. Hopefully the British Government will take the necessary action to prevent further consequences, because it is also worth remembering the leaders of the political groups in the European Parliament have stated that should the UK authorities breach or threaten to breach the Withdrawal Agreement through the United Kingdom Internal Market Bill in its current form or in any other way, the European Parliament will under no circumstances ratify any agreement between the EU and the UK.
Please, no interruptions from a seated position. Just let the member continue.
There is much at stake over the next number of weeks, A great deal is at stake for our communities and businesses across this island. Therefore, it is absolutely imperative that the British Government backtracks from this course of action, respects the rule of law and honours its obligations in full as set out in the Withdrawal Agreement which it negotiated and which the British Parliament ratified. I urge members to support the motion.
Thank you very much. Members, as question time begins at 2 o'clock, I suggest the House takes its ease until then. This debate will continue after question time, when the next member to speak will be Paul Givan.
Members, that concludes this item of business. Thank you all. And we're moving on now to we return to the debate on the consequences of the British Government breaking international law motion. And I now call Paul Givan.
Mr. Speaker, and the Minister there took us neatly into a debate on Brexit. So thank you for that, Minister. I suppose the question that members need to ask, first and foremost, is has the United Kingdom broken the law when it comes to considering this debate? There is an issue around reputational damage, that members may believe that the United Kingdom's action could be counterproductive to that on the world stage. Interesting how nationalists are worried about the British reputation across this globe, and that'll not be lost on many people. But has the United Kingdom broken the law? I think the question to that is no, it hasn't, because there hasn't been any court judgments in respect of this. European Commission have now instigated or a notice of potential legal action, and that would run its course. But much of the commentary that has taken place from members would infer that the UK has broken the law, and that isn't the case. Whenever we consider parliamentary sovereignty, which ultimately this is the UK Parliament that we're talking about, and this is an issue that's being dealt with in the UK Parliament, which some members in this House whose colleagues don't take their seats, but yet keep inflicting this chamber to debate after debate. At least, to be fair to the SDLP, they take their seats at Westminster and try to argue these points where actually the power resides, unlike Sinn Féin, which, if they were truly concerned about people's rights, they should take every forum open to them to try and articulate on behalf of their people, but they don't do that. But when it comes to parliamentary sovereignty, members will know that no executive branch or UK minister can just sign up to an international treaty. Those treaties then need to be brought through the national parliament and transposed into domestic law. And hence, if parliamentary sovereignty is vital for the acting or putting in place these laws, well, Parliament can accept that it makes mistakes, and Parliament may then decide that it wants to change that, and that's something that we should encourage. I will.
I'm grateful to my friend giving way. I wonder, could he reflect on the opinions of Martin Howe, QC, who said Section 38 of the Withdrawal Agreement preserves parliamentary sovereignty and makes it quite clear that Parliament has the right to pass the clauses which the Government is proposing, and thereby overrides the errant clauses in the protocol, the errant clauses which my friend was referring to.
No, it's a helpful contribution.
Member has an extra minute.
And he makes the point for me. What Parliament can do, it can also undo. That'll be legal. Now, it may be subject to the reputational damage that members opposite are concerned about, but when it comes to the principle of what Parliament is able to do, Parliament ultimately is sovereign. That's why we believe in an independent United Kingdom. It's also why we wanted to release ourselves from the shackles of the European Union and the way in which it conducts itself. And in a previous era, Sinn Féin were with us on this. They were opposed to everything that Europe was trying to do. It opposed countless treaties, campaigned against treaties. I really wonder what those who fought in the 1916 Rising thinks of their comrades today. They fought for freedom, and now the legacy passed on to them are people who are sycophants of the European Union and subjecting themselves to foreign rule. So Sinn Féin need to just ask themselves, do they want to keep bringing these motions back to the Assembly? Because we'll keep pointing out these contradictions for them. But in terms of the fundamental principle around can Parliament do this, then yes, it can. But this gets to the point, though, even in the clauses contained within the United Kingdom Internal Market Bill, if it even comes close to breaking or potentially breaking the law, I think that is something that members rightly can call in to question. Because the regulations that are made under those clauses may be subject to a breach, and that would be subject to further legal debate. But the actual clauses that are contained in that, I don't think comes anywhere close to breaking international law. And yet we have listened now for weeks, the concerns being expressed by members in regards to this issue. Yes, I'll give way to the member from South Belfast.
I'm very grateful to the member for giving way. He said the provisions in the bill don't come close to breaking international law. Why then does he think the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland said at the dispatch box these provisions will break international law?
That's a question you can ask the Secretary of State. I'm not worried about the Secretary of State, I'm worried about what's actually in the bill. And whenever I look at it, but ultimately let a case be taken, and if it ends up in court, we'll get a judicial ruling on that. I doubt very much that it'll ever come to it. But even when it comes to the UK Human Rights Act of 1998, it also raises this issue contained within that it also provides for non-compliance under important treaties, namely, actually the European Convention on Human Rights, one would consider a very important treaty. That Act of 1998 makes provision for non-compliance if it comes to the stage where the United Kingdom government feels that it wants to do it. And turning to the actual...
Member, bring his remarks to a close.
Yes, I'm struggling to see how long I've left, Mr. Speaker, because the time hasn't been up. How long? I know that's been my problem. The time hasn't been up, Mr. Speaker, but I'm sure that'll be kept in order for the benefit of other members.
Yes, you haven't that long left. Thank you.
Yeah. So even when we look at the protocols, Article 16 of the protocol allows potentially for breaches that are deemed serious. So the protocol itself allows for a breach to take place, but Article 1 of the protocol actually refers to the importance of the Good Friday Agreement. Contained within the Good Friday Agreement, the principle of consent, an integral part of the United Kingdom. Membership of the United Kingdom then should ensure that we have free trade within the component parts of the United Kingdom. And so what is happening with the protocol is the undermining of the Belfast Agreement and our position within the United Kingdom. I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker, if my time's up. It hasn't been on display.
I'm advised your time's up, and I think you've adequately put your position. Thank you. Okay, I call Matthew O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I am grateful for this motion having been brought before the Assembly, and I rise to support it in broad terms. It's first of all worth saying at the beginning of my remarks something I said more recently in several of these debates, and that is that earlier this year this Assembly passed a motion calling for an extension to the transition period. That was ignored by the UK government. I would reiterate again, as we all on these islands and across this continent look at the choppy headwaters of a pandemic, rising cases and severe economic difficulty likely to flow from it, we should all surely in this Assembly agree that the most rational thing would be to follow that Assembly motion from a few months back and extend the transition period. Having said that, it looks unfortunately like the ideologues in number 10 are not going to do that and are going to ignore it. But this motion sets out the extreme disappointment and disapproval that the UK government has chosen to state, not just in the legislation but on the floor of the House of Commons, own up to the fact that they are plan to take the power to break international law. Clearly that is, Mr. Speaker, unacceptable. I've said it on this in this Assembly multiple times. And why is it unacceptable? It's unacceptable because international law relies on states doing what they say they do in international treaties. The point that has been made more than once, including today by Mr Givan, is that Parliament is sovereign, therefore Parliament reserves the right to resile from any international legal obligations that it makes. I'm happy to give way.
I'm grateful to the member for giving way, and he's a doughty champion of the European Union, no doubt as an institution of rules. That being the case, how does the member explain the convergence criteria that the European Union established for itself for countries to be admitted to the Eurozone, which they subsequently tore up in allowing Greece and Italy to join the Eurozone? Their rules mean one thing at one time and another thing at another.
Member has an additional minute.
I'm grateful. Convergence rules and the Eurozone are not what we're debating today. Albeit, I will say that they have made clear their position around the accession of, as it were, this jurisdiction back into the European Union, should we so wish at a later date. But to go back to my remarks in relation to this motion, it matters profoundly that the UK government and indeed all parties to the Good Friday Agreement not just live up to our obligations to one another, but treat one another with a degree of trust and respect. I'm afraid that has been sadly lacking over the last few years. Mr. Speaker, as I've said multiple times on the floor of this Assembly, it isn't just Liberal Remainers like me, it isn't just bleeding heart Europeans who are annoyed about the UK government breaking international law or saying it's going to break international law. We've had Brexiteers like Michael Howard, Geoffrey Cox. These are people who I agree with on very little, but who have talked about how terrible it is that any UK government should admit it's going to break treaties. Some in this chamber might say that British governments have a history. Despite being a nationalist and proud to serve as a nationalist in this chamber, used to work for the UK government. I have a slightly different attitude to the UK state. I don't stand here and gleefully bash it, as Mr Givan sought to characterise. But this UK government, be in absolutely no doubt, is becoming a pariah state around the world because of the way it treats its international treaty obligations. And that is not something which you have to take from me. That's something which you can take from a certain Margaret Thatcher, who said in 1975 at the launch of the Conservatives for Europe, Britain does not break treaties. It would be bad for Britain, bad for relations with the rest of the world, and bad for any future treaty on trade. Mr Speaker, it's not just about this part of the world. It's not just about Northern Ireland, although we are critical to it. It's about how this state sees itself around the world. If they want to be taken seriously, then they have to live up to their treaty obligations. And it's fine to say that Parliament is sovereign. If Parliament is sovereign, then what's the point never signing a treaty? It doesn't make any sense to simply be that reductive. The Good Friday Agreement is ultimately what is being protected in the Ireland Protocol. Let's be clear, no one thinks the Ireland Protocol is an ideal or optimal outcome for Northern Ireland, for this whole island, or indeed for trade relations across these islands, but it is simply and only a reaction to the red lines of successive British governments, red lines which were in part produced with the encouragement and collaboration of the party opposite. Nobody should be in any doubt that this is anyone's ideal scenario, but these are a set of protections that we need. They were carefully crafted and laboriously negotiated by the UK and the EU. They are in a treaty that is now lodged at the United Nations. It is genuinely unthinkable that any country seeking to take itself seriously would walk away from them now. And I've heard others in this chamber complain about the provisions of the protocol and Northern Ireland's place, as it were, within the UK internal market. Let me be absolutely clear. I want to see unfettered trade, east-west and north-south. Nobody should be in any doubt about that. But a couple of points in relation to that. First, I'll draw my remarks to a close. First, the thing that is causing disruption to trade on this island and across these islands is Brexit. This motion I support because it reasserts that this is about maintaining international law and delivering on the obligations made to people here.
I call Steve Aiken.
Much indeed, Mr Speaker. And first of all, may I commend the motion being brought from Sinn Féin and particularly from Dr Caoimhe Archibald, because I think the tone of this debate has probably been better than the usual Brit-bashing fest that we've been used to over the last month and a bit. I may also commend my very learned friend indeed from South Belfast for realising the Ulster Unionist Party's desire to have no borders north, south or east or west. But I think one of the most important things that we need to consider here is the importance of where we're at for Northern Ireland.
Members, order,
And,
please.
thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker, because that was quite disrespectful for talking over to me. And it doesn't really suit you, Matthew, because you're not normally of that sort. But allow me to, I imagine I would continue to do in the spirit of that as well. But the issue is sort of the United Kingdom having the possibility of breaching international law. And the most important point is that the Vienna Convention has been something that the United Kingdom has looked to support for a considerable period of time. And indeed, the Ulster Unionist Party has noted with concern the approach from the British government in their attempts to breach this particular law. And we have raised those issues in the House of Lords. Indeed, we have raised those issues directly with the Secretary of State. And one of the reasons we've raised these issues, because one of the things about the internal market bill is it doesn't answer the fundamental questions we have to deal with, and that is particularly with trade, where it's coming from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, or what we would call the level playing field for Northern Ireland, and a level playing field across our nation in the United Kingdom. Now, the fact that people might cite examples of the European Union, and I think we've already had one example being quoted about the Brexit situation and what happens to Greece. But unfortunately for many of us who have served, having to deal with the aftermath of the EU's intervention in the former Republic of Yugoslavia and the disaster that was, or indeed what's happening in the Mediterranean right now, or indeed the meddling that seems to have taken place in the Ukraine, you realise that the European Union is hardly a paragon of virtue when it comes to international. Certainly.
Member, agree with me, there is an irony in being lectured on the need and the munificence of European Union rule when this is an organisation that for 20 years auditors have been unable to clear their books.
Member has
indeed
a minute.
the member for, and may I thank the member for his comments. The next thing he'll be telling me that they will be following the Northern Ireland government's particular rules, that they haven't had their accounts audited or have always been given a qualification so far. But I think the other issue we need to be considering as well is that we've had examples cited of the United States. And one of the things I think was of considerable concern to us within the Ulster Unionist Party is less than 2 weeks ago, members from other parties, despite the implications of COVID, drove all the way down to Dublin for what is essentially a photo opportunity with Simon Coveney. And when Simon Coveney the next day...
Order, members. Sorry, Mr. Aiken. Members, it's just appeal you to pay respects to the Speaker on his feet.
Okay. But when Simon Coveney, who then went to the United States, he cited the example of quite a few members of the United States administration and the legislature about their support for so-called rule of law. And indeed, one of them he quoted was a Republican representative who supported such really proper things like Trump's wall, repealing the Affordable Care Act, removal from NAFTA, removal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And indeed, for many of us on this side of the House, there's a considerable concern that that particular representative seemed to spend a lot of his time glorifying IRA terrorism in the past. None of these things are likely to be able to raise their point to us to show that this is the kind of thing we should be looking at, and that is not an example. And if anybody thinks that it's not just a question of Republican administrations, but Republican administrations and Democrat administrations in the United States have both been very neglectful of international law and international treaties. But the real issue we have to have, and I've said it time and time again, is we have an opportunity here as members of this Assembly to send a message to both Frost and to Barnier, who are going into a non-tunnel tunnel, depending on which way you look at it, to send a very clear message that we want to see the lightest touch of regulation for all the people here in Northern Ireland. We do not want to see the issue where our goods in our supermarkets are going to go up in prices. We do not wish to see the position of our electricity market, meaning that we're going to have to pay more than 5%, an additional 5% for energy. We should, as an Assembly, be gathering together to instruct our executive to go and talk directly to Frost and Barnier and say, for Northern Ireland, you keep on saying that you want to put the Belfast Agreement to the fore of where we are. Well, let's do it. Actually, you've already intervened. Let us do it. We have an opportunity here. So, Mr. Speaker, I think this is the fourth debate we've had on this issue. And we, as the Ulster Unionist Party, have put in motions I think we've put in 2 motions And one of them is we wanted to debate about the issues about us talking to both the United Kingdom and the European Union about putting the interests of Northern Ireland first. So we still have that opportunity. So rather than continuously talking on about what the United Kingdom government has done is not going to do, we also really clearly need to talk about what the European Union should be doing as well. And we, as an Assembly together, on behalf of the people of Northern Ireland, should indeed be doing that. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. And I call Stewart Dickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I do rise to support the motion and speak on the subject for what I think is certainly the third, and maybe Mr. Aiken's right, the fourth time in the past number of weeks. Brexit is indeed a huge multifaceted issue, though I'm not quite sure why we keep coming back to the same specific point when the Assembly has debated and voted on this already. But I know my colleague Dr Stephen Farry, MP, has been working very hard to address these issues in Parliament by tabling amendments to the Internal Market Bill, as indeed of other Northern Ireland MPs. Perhaps today, the party that has tabled this motion...
Mr Dickson, would you just take your seat, please? Could I ask the members, just please, from a sedentary position, not to be making your voices? It's respect to the Speaker. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, the party that tabled the motion today, however, could tell us what they're doing on this issue, other than submitting motions to this Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I don't really want to stand here and once again rail at the United Kingdom government just for the sake of it, but I am genuinely disappointed that this is the path that the government is taking, and the damage that it's doing to our standing and our reputation around the world, a comment that has been made by others in this chamber. The provisions, Mr. Speaker, of the Internal Market Bill that enable the United Kingdom government to override an international agreement are an embarrassment. They need a rethink urgently, and as it moves to the Lords, perhaps we will see the shape of some changes to come. At this point, I think we all need to accept that Brexit is a mess. It is bad for business, it's bad for people's lives, and it's likely going to be bad for the international relations of the United Kingdom and its diplomatic influences around the world. We know that the protocol is not an ideal solution, but it's a response to the issues that a hard Brexit throws up. It's a compromise of a compromise. It's damage limitation. The original backstop would have offered much more and a more workable way forward for the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. But that was rejected by some because it didn't go far enough to depart us from the EU. Now the government says that these provisions are to override the protocol or just a safety net, and supposedly to protect the Good Friday Agreement. But if such changes were required, why were they not negotiated into the original agreement? However, the United Kingdom government agreed a deal last year, and the Prime Minister ran a general election on it. And if these issues were so central, why is it taking this long for the government to take action on it? There is, of course, the state aid red herring, which ignores the reality that the United Kingdom agreed with Japan, and in fact that binds it to stricter state aid rules than those that the EU is proposing. Now we have a situation where the UK's largest trading partner has launched legal action to try and enforce the agreement, all while the country seeks a comprehensive trade deal with it. Mr. Speaker, this yet another self-inflicted wound. How can the United Kingdom possibly go to other countries around the world and seek new trade agreements when it openly breaks deals signed not even a year ago? A no-deal outcome was never mentioned during the referendum, but now we're being told it's a good outcome. For whom? Certainly not for the workers and businesses that I come in contact with in Northern Ireland. And on top of the economic pain that we're already facing, it will just add further devastation. Ultimately, Mr. Speaker, the UK government can sort this by meeting its international obligations and striking a comprehensive trade deal with the European Union. 2020, by any stretch of the imagination, has and will be a tough year for everyone. People are worried about their incomes, their health, and businesses are on the edge. The deadline is galloping towards us. We need to be building a better future with fewer barriers to trade, protecting people's lives and standards. Sadly, I am not convinced that debating the same motion again and again will achieve any of this.
Thank you. And I call Christopher Stalford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And before I get into my comments, can I apologise for my chuntering from a sedentary position on the back bench? I was chatting to my colleague from North Antrim. He was just so excited to see me back. And I apologise to you, sir, for any offence
I think
that
Mr
I've
Storey may
caused
be a
you.
bad influence on you.
Yes,
now,
that's
just
right.
keep an eye on that.
Mr Speaker, the dictionary definition of cynicism is an inclination to believe that people are motivated purely by self-interest. And week after week, it appears as though we're debating a motion on one aspect or another of the United Kingdom's decision to leave the European Union. On this occasion, it's tabled by Sinn Féin. When the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland went into the common market together, Sinn Féin opposed that. When the Single European Act was passed, Sinn Féin opposed that. When the Maastricht Treaty, which created the European Union, was passed, Sinn Féin were opposed to that. When the Nice Treaty came along, Sinn Féin were opposed to that. Sinn Féin were opposed to the European Constitution. Sinn Féin were opposed to the Lisbon Treaty. Sinn Féin have been Eurosceptic longer than the Conservative and Unionist Party have. But suddenly, in this context, they are the great defenders of an organisation that they, not a few years ago, were denouncing as a corporatist scam that suppresses wages and exploits workers. It's for them to justify this sudden volte-face. Now, I have no doubt the next speaker after me will stand to their feet and say, we, in that perfunctory way, like some Brezhnev-era apparatchik, towing out the party line, we're in favour of a reformed European Union. Our experience, I think, has taught us reform of the European Union is impossible because it is an organisation in the 1957 Treaty of Rome that exists, according to its own definitions, for one purpose and one purpose alone: ever closer union and the dismantling of the nation-state. The irony of Republicans who drape themselves in the Irish flag and defend the sovereignty of the Irish people, so gained at such cost from evil British imperialists, now getting to their feet to defend a quasi-national government of the European Union is clearly lost upon them. It is ironic that they decry rule from London, but plead and beg to be ruled from Brussels. What sort of nationalists are they? People can see through this. They know what it is. It's positioning not out of any fealty to the European Union. To be fair, I've long given up on converting my colleague from South Belfast on that issue. That pass has long been sold in terms of his adherence and devotion to an organisation headed up by a failed German defence minister who had to be got out of the country because she was the least popular cabinet minister in Merkel's cabinet, and they found her a cushy job in Brussels on €122,000 a year. We've given up trying to convert Mr O'Toole to see the true nature of the European Union. But there's hope. There may be hope. There may still be a beating nationalist heart in Sinn Féin. I don't know whether it's nationalist or not anymore. Multinationalist, corporatist. I'm sure Jerry Carroll has a few words that he would use to describe it. What the government has done is rightly take the necessary measures to ensure that we are not tied in to this dangerous protocol, which is... Yes, I will.
Thank you very much indeed for coming back. We have enjoyed it. Thank you, Christopher.
Someone wouldn't give in. What the government has done is move to ameliorate the dangerous and damaging effects that this protocol will have, because it cuts Northern Ireland off from its largest market. Now, you cannot stand to your feet and say people need certainty and businesses need help and businesses need reassurance, while at the same time defending a proposal that cuts us off from our largest market. What you're doing if you defend that proposal is you're hurting Northern Ireland business. You're making it harder for people in Northern Ireland to get ahead and to make a living. You cannot stand to your feet and say you're standing up for the community when you're taking money out of your own constituents' pockets by supporting this protocol. The European Union is bad for business. It's bad for people's lives. It's bad for people's health. And I welcome the fact that we will no longer be living under their regulatory regime. I think it's important to put on the record the opinion of Martin Howe QC, who said, "There's a general principle in international law that treaty powers should be exercised in good faith, and the EU blockage of reasonable goods at risk between GB and Northern Ireland could be classed as bad faith." Indeed, that is precisely how it should be classed. And the idea that bad faith in this process has only come from one source, that is to say London, that is for the birds. Throughout this entire EU negotiation, they have used Northern Ireland as a bargaining chip. They threaten the prosperity of our people. At one point in the negotiations, they were threatening our very food supplies. But members here stand to their feet and sing the praise of this organisation. I trust our own people to govern ourselves rather than to be governed by that cabal.
And I now call Martina Anderson.
This motion does reflect the views of the majority of members in this chamber, who are absolutely appalled that the British government has abandoned even a pretence of adhering to international law. Whilst Tony Blair pretended his Iraq war was legal, Boris Johnson doesn't even pretend. He's boasting about breaking international law. And as for his claim that he's protecting the Good Friday Agreement, that's a lie. We already know what British ministers like Michael Gove think of the Good Friday Agreement. He described it as wicked. Universal condemnation of the British government from people like Angela Merkel, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Geoffrey Cox, and presidents of groups of the European Parliament falls on deaf ears. The British government has been served formal notice by the EU that it's taken legal action against Britain for breaking the law, for acting like a rogue state. And in this place we have ministers Dodds and Putts using their ministerial power to act more like Brexiteers as opposed to executive ministers. All executive ministers know that EU law, policy and funding touches on almost every aspect of life here. Indeed, there are 156 areas of all-Ireland cooperation, and they are some of the reasons why we need EU alignment across this island. Now, Section 45 of the law-breaking bill gives the British Secretary of State, who confirmed he's breaking the law, the powers to ignore the EU requirement for goods coming in here, to renege on the Irish Protocol and on key elements of the Withdrawal Agreement. No, it won't. So chlorinated chicken and hormone-injected beef could go into the mouth of babes. Clause 46 of the bill overrides the power of this Assembly and the Executive and gives the British government powers to give financial assistance, probably to their friends, with no areas excluded. Health, water, electricity, education, transport are all up for grabs, allowing British ministers to run riot with matters that reside within our remit. This Assembly has refused to introduce water charges. We've objected to the privatisation of our health service, but are they going to be tried to be imposed over our heads? Now, we know only too well that it's not only Tory British ministers who use power to do favours for their friends. £500 million of public money went up in RHI smoke here, literally, so that some of that was done for their friends. Those on the opposite benches, they want us to suck it up, live in some kind of hokey-pokey Ireland with one part in the EU and another part out. Well, we're not sucking it up.
Point of order, Mervyn Storey.
Speaker, refer the comments of the member in light of the report that was carried out in regards to RHI, and will the member's comments be investigated in the light of what he has claimed in this House today, because clearly what he has said is not in keeping with what the finding of the inquiry was, and therefore I would ask her to remove and to withdraw the comments that she has made.
Just could I ask members to stick to the motion, please.
I will stick to the motion. Not even some of your supporters who now realise that the 310 miles of the border partition in Ireland is not just an issue for Irish Republicans and nationalists, it's now a problem for unionists and nationalist farmers and businesses, just as it's now a problem for the EU too. This day, 52 years ago, no thank you, the 5th of October, people took to the streets demanding civil rights and got their heads smashed in for doing so. 52 years on, hard-won rights are being trampled on by a British government breaking international law, and it'll likely trade away protections against torture for grubby trade deals with foreign tyrants. Disabled rights, political rights.
Mr. Storey, I would ask you again for the final time this afternoon, please respect people who are speaking.
Thank you. Disabled rights, political rights, rights for carers protected by the EU are already gone. Now, whilst you on the other side of the chamber can ignore a conversation taking place about the form and the shape of the new Ireland, you can't stop it and you don't have the strategic vision to shape it. So, to the SMEs who want to trade with the EU and the rest of the world, to farmers who want their single farm payments, to students who want to enjoy the experience of Erasmus, to workers who want maternity leave and holiday pay guaranteed, to employers who do not want to juggle two sets of employment rules. There is a democratic way back into the EU. The EU Council sent us a message when it said that if this country is reunited, then the whole of Ireland will remain in the EU. Thank
you, and I call Gary Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Another day and another motion on the withdrawal agreement and the protocol. At a time when constituencies out there are struggling financially, businesses are crippled, constituents are worried about their health and the implications of COVID-19. Once again, Sinn Féin come forward with another Brit-bashing motion, a political stunt which will have no impact here in this Assembly, but in just 2 seconds, but where it will have an impact, of course they don't take their seats. I will give...
And Mr. Speaker, and indeed thank you to the Speaker for giving way, but I might have given this sort of apprehension or give this sort of false impression that this debate was going to be held in a respectful manner. And up until the last speaker, I thought that it was being done in a respectful manner. I would ask us all in this Assembly to stop this incessant Brit bashing and actually concentrate on the issues in hand.
Member has an extra minute.
Contribution, but unfortunately, it doesn't surprise me that this is the tone that we go down. The people of the Foyle constituency know exactly what Sinn Féin are like, and they have been exposed time and time again. And thankfully, the more the people realise what Sinn Féin are about, I think the better this country will be. I will give way for the last time.
Of course, as the member for Foyle who keeps the law, unlike the previous speaker, who in her tweet today was advocating that you should keep all the COVID rules. It's a pity she didn't apply the same rules when she attended the funeral of Bobby Storey.
I thank the member for his intervention. I completely agree. But again, I think that the people on all of these issues, the people aren't stupid. And people do see Sinn Féin and their hypocrisy for exactly what it is. Nationalists and Republican representatives in this chamber cannot pick and choose which parts of international agreements that they want to honour. The DUP tabled 12 amendments to the Internal Market Bill. One of them would have given this place consent over the protocol, but the SDLP voted against it. Sinn Féin didn't turn up to vote against it. It seems to be that some members in their parties in this chamber think that only the provisions in the Belfast Agreement and international agreements that benefit nationalists are what matter. Though whatever the circumstances approached by Sinn Féin, the SDLP and the Alliance Party is not acceptable. Sadly, local politicians have been used by the European Union over the course of this past 4 years. For the EU, this was never about protecting peace in Northern Ireland. It has always been the case that the EU just cannot accept the fact that the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, and they cannot get over it. The EU continue to use Northern Ireland as a weapon to punish the United Kingdom as a whole. It is my hope that the members across the chamber will soon recognise this fact. The reality is that the EU are failing to honour their own international commitments as set out in the Withdrawal Agreement. The Northern Ireland Protocol states in Article 1 that it is without prejudice to the provisions of the 1998 Agreement regarding the constitutional standing of Northern Ireland. It goes on and states that it respects the essential state functions and territorial integrity of the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, the problem is that the EU have not respected these aims. They have never fully understood the Belfast Agreement. They have never respected the principle of consent. They have never recognised the sovereignty of internal UK trade. And they just will not accept the fact that East-West trade is just as important as the North-South trade to many others in this chamber. So in finalising, Mr. Speaker, I do want to say that it is disappointing once again that this motion has taken the turn that it has. I do appeal to those members of other parties who are being used by Sinn Féin, because Sinn Féin will quote this and say that the Assembly has passed this motion. Do not be used. The people have called on to Sinn Féin a long time ago. I would urge members to put Northern Ireland first and foremost and ensure that we get the best for our citizens here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And I call Emma Sheerin.
I get the and I rise to support this motion. The Internal Market Bill, according to the British Government, will prevent further divergence between the North and Britain, something that many would argue Brexit itself has made inevitable. Setting aside the fact that we're operating in a contested territory with a history of conflict and competing narratives, and that our systems are intrinsically different to those in Britain, one obvious issue on which the North is already in stark contrast to the UK is on the provision of rights. We are at a rights deficit when compared to Britain. We don't have a single Equality Act here in the North and have relied on the EU for most of our rights protections up until this point. Given how rights were denied and distributed in the past, this is a sensitive subject, and protections are powerful. Many of the rights that we've now come to take for granted, such as the right to parental leave, the guarantee of equal pay regardless of race, gender or religion, have been in place because of EU directives. The Irish Protocol gave us a promise that leaving the EU wouldn't automatically mean losing these things. An example of this is in the fact that in Annex 1 of the Protocol, EU directives on equal treatment in the workplace are included. No, thank you very much, after you spoke to my colleague the way you did. The Internal Market Bill, on the other hand, potentially gives the British Government the power to override these things. We've seen in recent times that in terms of immigration law, the British Government regard us all as British, even though the Good Friday Agreement stated that we could be British, Irish or both, as per a person's own identity. I have to renounce a British identity that I have never had, and however much that might grate on me, it doesn't change my ability to work. But it now looks like post-Brexit, civil service employees, for example, will have to have a British nationality. For those not born in the North and not automatically treated as British by virtue of a birth certificate, that presents a significant challenge. When the Chief Executive of the Human Rights Commission presented to our Executive Office Committee a couple of weeks ago, I asked him if it was likely that we're going to have a situation whereby Irish passport holders are going to end up with more rights in terms of free movement than British passport holders. He told me that all through negotiations, they were told that there would be an inevitable asymmetry in rights. Gardaí in the 26 counties can ask for passports from non-EU citizens. Post-Brexit, a British passport holder from the North is a non-EU citizen. Does this mean you have to carry your passport if you're British, but I don't because I'm Irish? Of course, in terms of the continued access to and exercise of EU rights, opportunities and benefits for Irish citizens in the North, we still have no clarity as to whose responsibility this will be. It's already been acknowledged that for cross-border justice cooperation, no deal is going to leave us with a gap in law enforcement capability generally. I'm lucky enough to have been born in the 90s, but with one parent from another jurisdiction on this island, crossing the border was a common feature of my childhood. My memories of soldiers peering in through the window as we drove over Lifford Bridge are few, but fraught with fear and anxiety that I inherited. We do not want to go back to army checkpoints. For anyone who lives on or around the border, this isn't something you endure once or twice a month whilst on a visit to your granny, safe in the knowledge that you'd soon be enjoying contraband Coca-Cola hidden from your mother, but instead a daily inconvenience. Imagine having to present your passport, no thank you, and going through a checkpoint on your way to work in the morning, or on your way to get groceries on a Saturday, or with your children in the back seat as you collect them from school. We don't know that this will be a reality. We're less than 3 months out and we don't know. For EU migrants who have made their home here, it looks like they're going to have to require an ETA to go into the 26 counties, making constant applications in order to commute. So if you're a person born in Portugal but now playing football in Dungannon, you'd need an ETA if they draw a team from Monaghan or Cavan or Donegal in the Ulster Championship. Whilst that's an example that trivialises this issue, for our migrant population, many of whom will have language barriers and the challenges of racism and stereotyping to deal with, this is yet another barrier, yet another attack on their rights, isolating and disenfranchising a group of people who have come here to make a better life and who enrich and bring diversity to our society. The Charter went further than the Convention to protect immigration rights, and now the Tories are trying to give themselves Henry VIII powers to override EU immigration legislation post-Brexit. The Protocol and the Withdrawal Agreement protected our rights, as listed in the ECHR and the Good Friday Agreement, via two mechanisms: the non-diminution of rights, in layman's terms, a guarantee from the British Government not to roll back on rights, and then a dedicated mechanism, funding and powers to human rights organisations who work here in the North to hold them to that promise. The Internal Market Bill risks both of these measures, and considering the British Government's form, I have grave concerns. Cormac.
Thank you. And I call Pat Catney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise to support the motion. Mr. Speaker, though I was shocked when it came to light that this Tory government intended to deliberately break international law, I originally did not worry. I did not worry because the time again it has come to change concrete policy on a whim based on whether the Lord Emperor Cummings has had his morning coffee or not. So I have waited patiently for the inevitable backtracking and U-turn, but here we are today with the EU actively beginning a formal legal process against the UK, and still we have no movement from the Prime Minister. The arrogance of his post-Empire delusion has now gone completely overboard. We laugh and mock when the President of the United States gets up to this nonsense. Anybody watching the government benches in Westminster will be able to see that the Trumpism is alive and well in Britain. The Internal Market Bill is just one more example of a Tory government that will do anything to get back to its self-perceived glory days at anyone's expense. We are at a critical point. The end of the year is only around the corner, and without action now, our businesses, our employees, and all our citizens will suffer. To that point, I note with interest, in response to my written question, that the Minister for the Economy said that she had frequently discussions with the United Kingdom Business Secretary and Northern Ireland Secretary in the run-up to the publication of the Internal Market Bill. I wonder if she did her bit as a Minister of this executive to voice the concerns of businesses and citizens here who now face a cliff edge in January with seemingly no prospect of a positive outcome. Mr. Speaker, I can only base my decisions in this chamber on my own life experiences. I opened my first businesses when I was young. Some suppliers gave me a chance and worked hard to repeatedly build up that trust with them so I could be supported throughout my career. And that is the only way to build a successful agreement, through building trust. Without trust, there is no possible way forward, no chance of success, and only hurt and despair for all involved. Due to the actions of the disillusioned British government, there is no trust. They have shown time and time again that they will willingly break their agreements. More significantly for us, they have shown that they could not care less about Northern Ireland. They tell us they are looking out for us while threatening us with food shortages and tearing up agreements designed to protect us from the worst impacts of their own disastrous vanity projects. We in this chamber must say clearly that the British Government must honour the Withdrawal Agreement to protect jobs, our businesses and our future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, and I call Andrew Muir.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I rise once again on behalf of the Alliance Party to speak on the subject of Brexit. I must say it does feel a bit like Groundhog Day with the amount of motions we've debated thus far, and I'm probably confident there's been more heat rather than light that's come out of this. The Alliance Party is, however, keen to ensure that a successful negotiation is concluded and an outcome is made. However, it is unhelpful that this Assembly to use this issue to vent long-held resentment towards the EU or the UK Government. The right thing for this Assembly to do is to call on both sides to negotiate in good faith to secure the best possible outcome for the lives and livelihoods for the people of Northern Ireland. The UK Government's willingness to break international law is not good faith negotiation. It reduces the chances of a comprehensive free trade agreement. We are not naive about the negotiating process, but the UK Government's expression of its willingness to break international law was a mistake and has made the deal more difficult. My party has been consistent from the start, Mr Speaker. We supported Remain. We wouldn't be having the debate today if we were remaining within the European Union. We were against the Withdrawal Agreement and we supported an extension to the transition period, especially important in light of the economic circumstances we face in the context of COVID-19. However, regrettably, we are where we are, and the only option that remains is for both sides to negotiate in good faith and to strike a deal that's best for Northern Ireland. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, and I call Justin McNulty.
I rise to support the motion, even though it feels a bit like a repeat of previous motions, but there is still merit in revising the arguments. The Ireland Protocol contains vital protections for the North and for the whole island of Ireland. The Protocol is no one's first choice for our island, but it is a necessary response and compromise that's been forced by the hard Brexit ideology of the right-wing ideologues in Downing Street. The Internal Market Bill is a blatant, irresponsible instrument that seeks to override the Ireland Protocol. It recklessly threatens the Good Friday Agreement in substance and spirit. Right now, businesses want to see the Protocol implemented in a way that works. Right now, businesses want maximum access to both the UK and the EU markets. Right now, businesses want and need clear and unambiguous information on where they stand and what the future holds so that they can plan and prepare. Right now, businesses and communities know that the way to achieve this is for the UK to abide by its treaty obligations and work constructively to implement the Ireland Protocol. They know if you try to assert exclusive sovereignty over this part of Ireland, you are doomed to failure. Are we here just going to be the collateral damage of Tory ideologues' Brexit bonkers? The Good Friday Agreement recognised the importance of shared sovereignty over 20 years ago and recognised the importance of the EU, the UK, Northern Exec and Dublin Government involvement. The British Government's threatened divergence from previously agreed international agreements breaks the law. It is incredible that there are those members opposite who are cool with that. A member opposite spoke of cynicism. Well, he cannot be cynical about the SDLP's commitment to the EU and to the values of respect, human dignity and human rights, freedom, democracy, equality and the rule of law. I am a proud Irishman and a proud citizen of Europe. I abhor that my rights as an EU citizen are being stripped away and that there are those in this chamber who are going along with it to appease Tory overlords. No, I want to get home. That cannot be allowed to happen. My rights and the rights of every EU citizen, every Irish citizen, must be protected. The Ireland Protocol must be honoured. I support the motion.
Thank you. And I call Jim Allister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So here we are, third successive week in which we have been debating a motion so that Sinn Féin and other Europhiles can beat their chests and vent their spleen about Brexit and effectively howl at the moon about the fact that we're leaving the EU. 3 weeks of the same thing, interspersed only with the interesting fact that last week Sinn Féin minister proposed a Brexit enabling bill to this House. It was a welcome break in that particular litany of approach. But this is a motion built upon, let's use a kind word, a misconception. The misconception that international law in some way trumps domestic law, that in some way it trumps parliamentary sovereignty. It does neither. It's a fundamental rule of our Constitution that no treaty can change our law without an Act of Parliament giving effect to it. And the Act of Parliament that gave effect to this treaty was the Withdrawal Act of 2020. Section 38 could not have been clearer. Nothing in this Act derogates from the sovereignty of Parliament. Joe Moan, QC, has already been referred to by Mr Stalford. He's no friend of the government. He's the founder of the Good Law Project that has brought many challenges over Brexit. But he said this: if parliamentary sovereignty means anything, it means Parliament can enact legislation that breaches international law. That's Mr Europe himself speaking. That's so. Yes?
For giving way, because neither Ms Sheerin nor Mr McNulty chose to, both of which mentioned rights and equality. The member will recall from the time when I was blissfully employed by him in his European office that there was a time when the only people that it was legal to discriminate against in the entirety of Europe were people from Northern Ireland from a Protestant community background applying for jobs in the police. And who gave the permission, made the accommodation to allow that to happen? Maybe the member could illuminate the House on that.
Yes, of course.
The member has an extra minute.
The member has emerged very well from his difficult background, I must say, and he's done very well, and I take some pride in that. But the member's right. Of course, all of that was EU induced, and of course, the British government had to seek an exemption from the very European Convention of Human Rights to bring in that discrimination. And the people campaigning today weren't campaigning then about any of those matters. So let's be very clear. Parliament can do and undo, and that's perfectly lawful, and that is within parliamentary sovereignty. But to hear Sinn Féin pontificating about upholding the rule of law, that, I have to say, has a special resonance all of its own. And particularly to hear it from the member from Foyle, who to this day is proud of her own breaking of the law as a bomber. A party which in more recent times has been more than happy to break the law on COVID restrictions. But here they are today, pontificating about someone daring to break the law. Such dissembling. And the dissembling doesn't end there. Pretending concern over job losses and business failures. Those are the very things they want to preserve by supporting the protocol. Because it is the protocol that threatens jobs. It's the protocol that fetters our trade with our biggest market. It's the protocol that will put businesses out of business. It is the protocol that will take money out of the pockets of our consumers to pay the extra tariffs and the extra customs. And yet here they come with a motion, with crocodile tears, about threats to business and job losses, when the very thing they're supporting is the very thing that will do that. Does Sinn Féin care? No, because the ideological achievement of driving a border down the Irish Sea trumps everything for Sinn Féin. My only regret is that some who should know better, some who recognise the pattern of needless motions, nonetheless will egg them on today by voting for that motion. It's time they drew a line and realised where they've been led. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call John O'Dowd to close and wind the debate, and the member has 10 minutes.
I'm actually not sure where to start because Paul Givan threw me altogether in his introductory remarks. He started off as explaining in his view what international law is, and he's perfectly entitled to do that. He then went on to bring up the leaders of the 1916 Rising and his concerns with how they would feel where Sinn Féin is at the minute in regards our position in relation to Brexit, Europe, etc. And then he went on to question our Republican Socialist credentials on the world stage. And I sat and listened to him and wondered, have I entered a different time zone? Have I entered a world where things have completely turned upside down? And then I realised what was going on. It's a classic example of distraction politics. Talk about something else other than what we want to talk about, or what you don't want to hear your base talk about, or your supporters talk about, or farmers talk about, or factory workers talk about. Because the reality is this: many within the unionist community have serious concerns about Brexit, and where the DUP and the Ulster Unionist Party, who followed the DUP, have brought them to. And we see that in terms of where the Ulster Farmers Union position has got to, where they're expressing serious concerns. We see that in terms of where the business sector has got to in expressing serious concerns about where Brexit has led them. And I'm sure in Gary Middleton's constituency, there are serious concerns as to where Brexit has led everyone.
Would the member give way?
I will briefly.
Thank you very much. I'm just a bit disappointed that the members joined us with Simon Coveney and various other people on unions splaining. And I think members of this party, and I'm not speaking for your own party on the side of us as well, but actually we know very clearly what our constituents want, and it's not a border down the middle of the Irish Sea.
I'm not here to question what your constituents want or don't want. You delivered the border down the Irish Sea. I didn't. Gentlemen and women on this side of the chamber delivered the border down the Irish Sea. I didn't, and hence the reason why I'm pointing out the fact that you're trying to distract the debate away from where we are. So let's move on. So I'm going to move back not to 1916 but to 2016, because the question is constantly, or the points constantly raised in this chamber. Oh, Sinn Féin didn't support the EU back in 1970, or the EEC back in 1970. It reminds me of some debates among the left. Oh, you didn't do this, and where were you? You weren't on the barricades when we were on the barricades. Where were you? Party political changes or positions evolve. Party debates take place. Changes happen on a global scale, on a local scale, and parties move with those changes. But I want to reference 2016, because I was in the executive in 2016 and then out. I was also sitting in this chamber in 2016. And as we moved towards the debate on Brexit, it was quite often you would see the DUP branches empty, because there was a major debate going on within the DUP as to what position they would take on Brexit. There was more meetings in the third floor in the DUP rooms than there was in this chamber, as orders came from Westminster onto what position the DUP should adopt. And the DUP MPs in Westminster, who had fallen into the influence of much older, much more stranger men in terms of the European Research Group, were sending back word that they needed to support Brexit. So in 2016, as this debate was moving forward, the DUP didn't even have a position on Brexit. Not at the moment. I will let you in, don't you worry about it. They didn't have a position on Brexit. And then they adopted, we will support Brexit. And they moved forward and they supported Brexit. I'll let you in a moment. And they have brought it to a position where what have they delivered? A potential border down the Irish Sea, economic damage, competition which has never been seen before to the farmers, and also competition which has never been seen before to the business sector. So when they sat in the third floor in their party room, listening to either the pleas or the orders from their MPs to support Brexit, they made a huge mistake. But there's always an opportunity to correct that mistake. I'll let Mr. Storey in, then I'm going to move on.
I thank the member for letting us in. Maybe I could just clarify for the member who has been a member of the DUP since I was 15. We don't take our instructions from London, and unlike the party opposite, we don't have an army council that gives us our instructions either.
Well, I've been a member of Sinn Féin from I was 18, and I don't take instructions from anywhere else other than the Ard Comhairle of Sinn Féin. So, another distraction from Mr. Storey. The reality is, in mid-2016, you didn't have a position on Brexit until you were told by your MPs in Westminster what you needed to do. And now, since then, you have become avid Brexiteers, despite the fact that this government, and Mr. Aiken says we're not allowed to Brit bash. I'm not really a Brit basher, to be honest with you. But Mr. Aiken then went on to bash United States politicians, European politicians, and Irish politicians. So let's not bash anybody. Let's speak about what's happening and what has happened, what our experiences are. I'll be honest with you, when a British Prime Minister or a Minister stands at the dispatch box in Westminster and makes a statement, I have difficulty in believing anything they tell me. Real difficulty, because experience has taught me that. Now, that doesn't mean there hasn't been honourable Westminster MPs, ministers, and even Prime Ministers who stretch themselves for peace in Ireland, and I respect them for various parts of that. But the fair reality is, we have never been served well from the dispatch box in Westminster. Hence the reason we have a local assembly. Hence the reason that we come together here and we try to work out things among ourselves. I recall when Ian Paisley Sr. was proposing that him and Martin evict the ANIO from Stormont Castle. He says, Martin, you and we can run this place better than anybody. And I think at times we show potential for that. We show huge potential for our people. But the reality is, as long as the DUP and others are tied to the right-wing tail of the Tory party, it's always going to cause difficulties for this society. So why don't we govern better for ourselves? Why don't we collectively turn around and say, the will of the people here is this, that we shouldn't have Brexit, that Brexit is bad for business, bad for farming, bad for our community, bad for investment, and now we have our government who has turned around once again. They're going to break an international agreement. And I'll come on to Mr. Allister in a minute, but they're going to break an international agreement to negotiate with the EU. Now, they've broken agreements with the DUP. They're now going to break international agreements. What's to say they're not going to break future agreements with you? Whatever assurances Boris has given, or whoever has given to the DUP and others, what's to say they're not going to break that again? Which brings me back to the point that we are better governing ourselves than allowing others to do it to us. Now, Mr. Allister, I'm not going to get into a legal argument with a barrister. I have more sense than that. But does anybody remember Gina Miller? Do you remember Gina Miller brought a court case to the Supreme Court arguing the point that Parliament was supreme, that the will of Parliament had to be listened to? Do you see the very people now who are arguing that Parliament's will is supreme are the very people who demonised Gina Miller, who demonised the woman who ensured that Parliament had a say in the Brexit negotiations, who ensured that Parliament was the body that voted on the withdrawal agreement they're about to break. So you can't have it both ways, folks. You can't stand here and tell me as an Irish Republican that Parliament is supreme and then follow on the coattails of the people who so harshly criticised Gina Miller for making sure that your Parliament did have a say on it. Quickly.
Miller's case that led to the very declaration by the Supreme Court that Parliament is supreme. Now, that wasn't probably... that created the principle, and that's the principle which informs the recent legislation and the treaty.
Well, you read it on to this point then. You have a sovereign Parliament whose government negotiates an international agreement, who then endorses that agreement, cannot break that agreement. You can't have a new negotiation. You can't, your negotiators can't go away and negotiate with other countries and bring back a restructured agreement. But you cannot unilaterally break an international agreement. I'm not getting away because I'm only a minute late. It leaves you open to criticism, and also it leaves you open to suspicion, which leaves me on this point. In the absence of a trade agreement, the part of these islands that will suffer the most is here.
Members, time's up.
We will suffer the most, so there's an urgency on us all to ensure that the message is sent out quite clearly. Honour your agreements.
Thank you, members. And the question is that the motion standing on the order paper be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Okay. Well, as members understand, then, as we have social distancing policies and measures in place, then it's very difficult to make a call on the result of the vote. I'm content to take the vote again, and if we still have dissenting voices, then the House will divide. Motion standing on the order paper be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The House will divide. The House will divide. Clear lobbies. Okay, members. The tellers for aye are Caoimhe Archibald and Martina Anderson. The no tellers are Gary Middleton and Mervyn Storey. Before the Assembly divides, I want to remind you that, as per Standing Order 112, the Assembly currently has proxy voting arrangements in place. Members who have authorised another member to vote on their behalf are not entitled to vote in person and should not enter the lobbies. I also remind you to ensure that social distancing continues to be observed while the division is taking place. Please be patient at all times and follow the instructions of the lobby clerks. Clear lobbies. The Assembly will divide. Ayes to my right, noes to my left. Okay, members, all resume their seats. Yep. Clerk, could you please read the result?
84 members voted. 46 members voted aye. 38 members voted no. The motion is carried.
Okay, members, the motion is carried. Unfasten the doors.